So you'll see that up on the upper left corner here. And I think what we're going to do is essentially put this up on our website for posterity purposes and just for us to be able to go back and take a look at all the wonderful comments that we had. Also, I just wanted to make sure that everybody kind of understands the purpose of tonight is really to kind of try to drive a lot of the stakeholder input that we're looking for in terms of, folks basically hitting the general plan website, taking the survey, taking a look at the land use and capacity report. Of course, we welcome any comments that you have, but the primary focus for tonight is going to be really looking at how can we drive further engagement. And I'm sure that, all you guys are representing groups with some constituents that are dying to participate on this process. So from that side of things, we really welcome you and ask for your help in helping us to reach that audience. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Beth to get us started.
Good evening, I'm Beth Thompson. I'm a principal with De Novo Planning Group, and I'm really excited that we are unveiling the land use map alternatives, and you're all here to hear about them and to provide some input. So just quickly, I'll go through a quick overview of the general plan update itself and the brownfields revitalization planning effort, briefly discuss some state requirements related to the general plan, and then provide a broad overview of the 3 land use map alternatives. And then we have 5 different focus areas that we're looking at a little more closely. And so I'll briefly discuss those alternatives by focus area, introduce you to the survey that we have available to get some community input, and then talk about next steps in the process. We've already done the welcome and introduction, so quickly go through to the background. So the general plan is a broad programmatic planning document, and in preparing the general plan, the city has to look at a number of state requirements. So it is definitely a community-based document where the intent of the general plan is to identify Pittsburgh's vision for its future, the goals that the city has, and policies and programs to help the city attain those goals. While doing that, we also look at what the state requires the city to include in the general plan. And since the city's general plan was adopted in 2001, there have been a number of bills that address a range of requirements, including housing requirements, environmental justice, looking at transportation and mobility, and addressing how the city adapts to climate change. And not having a complete general plan that addresses all of the components of state law does mean that sometimes the city won't be able to access a number of state, federal, regional funding programs. And it also makes it hard for the city to defend its general plan if it's called into question. So we always look at making sure as we're preparing the general plan that we are addressing all of the requirements of state law, in addition to meeting the needs of the community. So the general plan is made up of chapters that are typically referred to as elements. And state law requires that we include specific topics in the general plan, including land use, environmental justice, circulation, open space, conservation, safety, which also addresses flooding, wildfire, potential exposure to a number of hazards, noise, and then housing. The housing element will be updated separately from the remainder of the general plan. It's the only element of the general plan that's on a specific cycle with the state. And so the state will have an 8-year term that the housing element has to address, including a regional housing needs allocation the city receives. And so that will be on a separate track. The remainder of the general plan, though, will be fully updated through this process. In addition to the topics required by state law, the city's opted to include a number of topics in its general plan. These include a section on urban design, an element focusing on the downtown, addressing community health and wellness, public facilities, youth and recreation, economic development, and growth management. And the growth management element is required for CCTA funding programs, as well as helping the city plan how to manage and pace its growth and ensure that it has adequate services and infrastructure to serve new growth. So in looking at the general plan, we really look toward the future. What does the city want to see in the future? How do we address mobility? How do we make sure that the needs of youth, recreation, family-oriented activities, community-oriented activities are being provided? Are there adequate shopping opportunities for the city? Is there an adequate types and range of housing opportunities? Are we considering safety in terms of how land uses are oriented towards one another? Are there enough opportunities for there to be new jobs in the city? how are we addressing growth? Does the city want to grow quickly and have a lot of growth? Does the city want to grow moderately? So when we've developed these land use alternatives, we've taken into account a lot of the community input we received through the visioning process and created several very different and distinctive alternatives that provide different approaches the city can take to addressing land use, resource conservation, and meeting the community's needs and vision for the future. So this is a multi-year process. The city started the general plan update in 2019, and we finished the first phase of the process. We did some initial visioning, and then we've also prepared the existing conditions report. And if you haven't had a chance to read it and you want to know a little bit about Pittsburgh, the existing conditions report's available on the website. It's an extremely detailed document that discusses the city's development patterns, the natural resources that are present in the city, a number of socioeconomic and demographic factors that affect the city, environmental constraints, and then also provides the regulatory framework, which means the state, federal, and local and regional requirements that address each of those topics and that provide the framework for developing policies and programs. In 2019, we also began the visioning process. We held a series, and I'll go through this in more detail, but a series of community outreach events to identify what the community wants to see for Pittsburgh's future. What are the values of the community and what are the opportunities the city's residents and businesses and stakeholders see as the city grows? We also held last summer a separate brownfields revitalization planning effort. And so we held a virtual workshop. This was kind of at the outset of COVID, and we really wanted to make sure we got some good community input and also provided a lot of information. So we had a story map available online where participants in the brownfield workshop could go through and visit a number of opportunity areas and several brownfield revitalization sites. And we had a separate survey for that really focused on the community's priorities for those specific opportunity areas and revitalization sites. And now we're at the end of the second phase where we've identified the 3 land use alternatives, and we've prepared the land use alternatives and capacity report that provides a lot of detail about the specific alternatives as well as those focus areas. And so what we're anticipating the second phase of the process to culminate with is community input on the land use alternatives, and then ultimately going to the City Council and Planning Commission to have the city's decision makers identify the preferred land use map that we will be evaluating in the general plan environmental impact report, which is referred to as an EIR. And then we'll also prepare the general plan in support of that land use map and ensure that all of the policies and programs in the general plan are consistent with the preferred land use map that's selected. So the second step in the process will end with the preferred land use map that will then it will inform the third step. Following the completion of the draft general plan and the CEQA documentation, will then be ready for adoption of the general plan and certification of the EIR. So the visioning process that began in 2019 included 3 visioning workshops that were held at City Hall. And then also city staff went out to a number of pop-up events throughout the community and basically brought the workshop to the community. So the activities and questions we were asking at the visioning workshops were brought to the community so community members could also participate in that event. There was the Envision Pittsburg survey that was a broad community-based survey that looked at the overall priorities and goals of the general plan. And then the separate workshop that I'd already mentioned that had a more focused look at the opportunity areas and brownfield revitalization sites. In addition to these events, all of the information that's developed through the general plan update is available on the city's general plan update website, which is pittsburgh.generalplan.org. So if you want to see where we are at any point in the process or the various materials that have been developed, please visit the website. There's a lot of information there, and that really gives the public a chance to see what's going on throughout the process. So to date, we've had a number of documents that have been published. As I mentioned, the existing conditions report provides a really detailed overview of current conditions in the city. And we also had a separate economic report that identifies current economic issues and discusses retail, industrial, and office market needs, and then looks at a number of focus areas in the city as well. Separately, we have the Vision and Opportunities report that was published in July of 2019, and that summarizes all of the input we received at the 3 visioning workshops, the pop-up events, and that first Envision Pittsburg survey. And that includes all of the feedback we got. So every single comment we got is provided verbatim in the report, as well as a summary that kind of synthesizes the information and makes it a little more easier to read through. And the Vision and Opportunity report also includes the key themes that emerged from what we heard from the community in terms of the community's priorities and what the community really wants the general plan to address. And then just this month, we've issued the Land Use Alternatives and Capacity report that we're focusing on tonight, and that discusses the city's 3 land use map alternatives in detail and provides an overview of how those land use alternatives would result in jobs growth and housing growth and population growth in the city, what types of uses are associated with each alternative. So it really provides a good look at the land use alternatives, as well as how they affect the various focus areas. In terms of what we heard from the community, we grouped the guiding principles into 8 different areas. So we heard a lot of feedback on community character, how the community wants Pittsburgh to be seen, to grow, what's important to the community in terms of its character, a lot about mobility, ensuring that people can access key areas of the city, that there's opportunities for transit, increasing transit use, ensuring that there's bicycle and pedestrian mobility, looking at growth and development, ensuring that resources are conserved and that growth and development occurs in the appropriate areas, looking at prioritizing education and youth services, ensuring that shopping and services are available to community members and provided throughout the community, continuing to focus on parks and recreation, providing entertainment opportunities for the community, continuing to conserve the environment and make sure that the general plan respects the environment and considers environmental constraints and issues, and then also ensuring that adequate community services and resources are available and that they're paced with the growth. So now I'll quickly go through the land use map alternatives. Well, I say quickly, I'm not sure that it will be that quick, but I'll first let you know what the purpose of these alternatives is. So as I mentioned, there are 3 land use alternatives. So these are intended to provide a forum for discussion. So they're intended to generate discussion, to provide a number of different routes the city could take and paths forward in the future. They are not intended to have any one map selected, but we're anticipating that these provide a range of options that the decision makers can consider, that the community can comment on, and that the ultimate preferred land use map will be bits and pieces of each alternative based on the feedback from the community and the preferences of the decision makers, as well as new ideas we may hear through this process. So we're expecting that the final land use map that is evaluated in the general plan and draft EIR will be an assembly of bits and pieces of each of these maps and brings forward the best parts of each of the alternatives that you see. And in looking at build out, you'll see some really big numbers. When we're looking at the full build out of the city, you'll see that there's a lot of potential for housing growth and population growth. And there are a few things to keep in mind. When we're evaluating growth in the environmental impact report, we're required to look at the potential build out of the land use map. So when we're evaluating it consistent with the California Environmental Quality Act requirements, we look at the maximum amount of growth that is anticipated to occur with implementation of the land use map in both the city, its sphere of influence, and then also throughout the planning area. So it looks at a broad area for growth. Now, in fact, and in actual practice, there are a number of factors in play that limit potential development or cause it to occur at a slower pace than could be accommodated by the general plan. You know, there's parcel configuration, development standards provided by the zoning code and specific plan that further regulate land uses. There are creeds, covenants, and restrictions enacted by various homeowner groups, long-term leases that may have certain restrictions on land, and then also just the financial feasibility of future developers or property owners developing those uses right now or at some point in the future. So development in the short and midterm is expected to occur at lower levels than the actual build-out numbers. And that's really shown when you look at alternative C, which is the existing general plan. The city's had that general plan adopted since 2001, and you see that there still is a large amount of potential growth under that general plan. So over the past 20 years, that has not built out. So similarly, we wouldn't expect these alternatives to build out in the next 20 years, but rather to provide a long-term look at the future, and the city would build toward developing those over time. And of course, new development doesn't occur all at once, but it occurs in phases and gradually over time based on the market conditions that are present. So all that to say that the build-out numbers look very big, but there are a lot of factors and considerations that cause those to happen at a lower rate, particularly in the short and midterm. The general plan land use map alternatives mainly rely on the existing land use designations you see in the general plan. However, there are a few new designations we've added to the land use maps. You'll see that there's the employment center industrial designation. That replaces the city's business commercial designation with a broader designation, which accommodates offices, technology, and industrial uses. And it has an emphasis also on ensuring that as industrial uses are developed within that designation, that they're appropriately transitioned from sensitive receptors. So it would provide for greater consideration of how uses align with one another or interact. We've also taken the current marine commercial designation and revised that to be a marina commercial designation, and to put a greater emphasis on increased waterfront access, community-oriented recreation, and visitor serving uses, while also continuing to accommodate industrial and other marine-oriented businesses, but to really make that more of an activated, engaging use that provides for community access to the waterfront areas. We've also added a very high density residential designation that allows higher intensity multifamily uses up to 40 units per acre. And that's used very sparingly, but it is used in certain locations in the city where it's maybe appropriate to see some higher density residential uses. So with all of that, I'll jump into the alternatives, and we're referring to them as alternatives A, B, and C. And so I'll first go through alternative A. And alternative A is intended to provide a balance between residential growth and economic growth or employment generating growth. It provides for the broadest range of new housing types and new housing growth in both mixed use activity centers, as well as in a number of low density, medium density, and high density residential designations. So it provides for the most residential and population growth of the three alternatives. And the thought is it provides a number of higher densities that can result in more attainable housing options, so that it would increase housing opportunities for families, young professionals, the city's current workforce, as well as residents that may want to downsize but wish to stay in the community. So it would provide for a broader range of housing types than what you're currently seeing being developed. That's the intent. And the third intent is to provide for a balance between residential and retail and employment-based growth by providing for new housing opportunities and increased residential population that would support retaining your existing businesses, your existing commercial development, as well as expanding the demand for, as well as expanding the demand for non-residential goods and services. So providing for a number of employment and industrial uses, as well as commercial and services uses. And just encouraging those uses to remain in the city and to expand in the city. And you'll see with all three of the alternatives, each of the alternatives continues to designate the southern portion of the planning area as open space and parks and recreation. So you're continuing to see a lot of open space land to the south of the planning area, as well as continuing to designate a large portion of the northern portion of the city, kind of the central northern portion of the city along the waterfront as open space. So all of the alternatives continue to provide a significant amount of open space and a significant amount of parks designations. And I promise I'll scroll forward here in a minute. There we go. Alternative B provides for a more focused growth in employment and economic development areas. And so what it really envisions is that Pittsburgh continues to be a major employment hub to provide a lot of opportunities for employment industrial growth, economic growth, continuing to provide for services and retail and commercial growth, and then additional mixed use opportunities. We see more intense commercial development with higher employment densities than you may see with current development types. And so it's really looking at increasing floor area ratios, increasing the intensity of development and attracting a number of large employers to the city, as well as diversifying employment opportunities in the city. It also includes a number of mixed use areas that would provide both jobs and housing in concert with one another. And when we look at the focus areas, you can see the differences between alternative A and alternative B when we start looking in at how the different alternatives are being applied in the various areas within the city. And lastly, there's alternative C, and alternative C is the city's existing general plan. So this is the land use map that's currently adopted and effective in the city. And so this evaluates the growth potential under the kind of the business as usual condition. And by maintaining the general plan under alternative C, we would anticipate that the city would receive future requests for general plan amendments because it wouldn't necessarily implement the growth and development demand that the city is seeing currently. And then it also reduces the opportunity to create vibrant activity centers to increase waterfront access because we're not expanding and applying some of the new designations that would revitalize various areas or bring the community to the waterfront or bring the community to certain points for recreation opportunities. And if you've had a chance to look at the land use alternatives and capacity report, you'll see that there's a lot of information in there regarding the housing growth. We've distilled that down into just a one-sheet infographic. This is also in the city's latest newsletter for the general plan update. And this provides an overview of the midterm new growth for the planning area. So this looks at what we would anticipate, not necessarily at full build out, but the net new growth anticipated under each alternative, focusing on the vacant and underdeveloped sites in the city. This doesn't include existing growth, and this also doesn't include development projects that are in the project pipeline. So recently approved projects aren't included in these new growth numbers. So as you look at these, you'll see that under alternative A, we have the most capacity for new housing with 11,019 new housing units that could occur under alternative A, compared with 8,094 under alternative B, and then 6,085, the lowest amount under alternative C. And along with the most housing under alternative A, you'll see that we also have, of course, the most potential employment growth. We see different trends with the non-residential development. So this middle row here, where we have it, all of the numbers are in million square feet. Those are million square feet of non-residential development. So the 13.5 million square feet under alternative A refers to the potential for commercial growth, industrial growth, office growth, public and quasi-public uses. So just a range of employment, economic, and public development types that don't include residential uses. And we see the least amount of that growth under alternative A, which is still a lot of growth. It looks the least in comparison to the other alternatives, but 13.5 million square feet of potential non-residential development, a fairly significant number. And that would come with about 13,515 more jobs, resulting in over 1 job per household. So a job to housing ratio of 1.23 associated with these new growth numbers. And you'll see with alternative B, which is the employment and economic focused alternative, that we have the most potential for non-residential growth under alternative B, with 21.1 million square feet of non-residential development, which would equate to about 20,431 new jobs, and a jobs to housing ratio of 2.5 jobs per each new housing unit provided. And then lastly, with alternative C, the residential development or the non-residential development is in between alternatives A and B with 18.2 million square feet that equates to about 16,291 jobs and a jobs to housing ratio of 2.68 jobs per housing unit that would be anticipated under alternative C. And then in the land use and capacity report, you can also see the full build out numbers, and then also the numbers that include the existing growth and the project pipeline. So there's more data in the report that puts this all together as well. And then delving into the specific focus areas, we have a few overviews of the 5 focus areas. And if you all had gone and taken the opportunity sites and brownfield revitalization survey last year, you'll remember that there were 4 different focus or 4 opportunity areas, and we've added a 5th one just kind of based on how we saw land uses changing, so we could look at a different area and see how some of the changes that are being discussed would affect a specific area. So we'll start with Area A. This is the Energy Brownfields Revitalization Site, and this is one of the most interesting sites in the city because it's about 1,000 acres and it has a lot of capacity for change. And so there's definitely a lot of different approaches that can be taken with this site. And so under Alternative A, there's, as we discussed with Alternative A, a residential focus. So you'll see that Alternative A would have the most housing development associated with the energy site. Most of the housing would be medium and high density residential housing. There's also a portion of, you'll see kind of along the waterfront, there's a portion of marina commercial, and that would expand access to the waterfront, provide local shopping, lodging opportunities. And then it's hard to see with the border up here in the northeast corner, but it would connect to the adjacent shoreline park. So you would have some parks connectivity throughout the city. There would also be a large regional and community park within the project. And then Alternative A, in addition to providing the most residential opportunities, does provide for the largest amount of open space. So this alternative would conserve and preserve a significant amount of open space, 733 acres. So under Alternative A, we'd see potential for about 3,211 new housing units and 1.2 million square feet of non-residential development. So it would continue to have non-residential development and jobs creation, just not at the same level as Alternatives B and Alternative C. Alternative B has a focus on economic development and providing for more jobs. So you'll see that under Alternative B, we have the purple designation, the dark purple is industrial and the lighter purple is the employment center industrial. So a lot of employment center industrial and industrial uses, as well as a large area designated marina commercial, and then also a large park that would connect to the adjacent shoreline park. And Alternative B has the smallest amount of open space, but still has a sizable amount of open space with 456.8, or not, I'm sorry, not 456, 529.5 acres designated as parks and open space. Alternative C would continue the existing general plan, which designates the majority of the site as industrial. So you would mainly see the industrial designation continue, and then additionally, the 448 acres of open space. Area B is the former Johns Manville site and also encompasses lands that are north of East 3rd Street along the waterfront, as well as some lands that are to the east of Harbor Street as well. So you'll see that with Area B, we've definitely taken a few changes, but the overall area wouldn't change significantly under the 3 alternatives, but it would change. So with Alternative A and Alternative B, you'll see that the parks designation has been removed. There would continue to be a requirement for some of these parcels along East 3rd Street to provide community recreation uses. There's requirements that are tied to those parcels. So you would continue to see community recreation and parks uses, but those would be addressed through policies of the general plan, as opposed to a specific designation for parks on that site. So although the park designation has come off, the parks requirement would remain. So that's important to note with both Alternatives A and B. You'll see with Alternative A, there's a shift to a larger amount of the marina commercial designation, which is intended to activate the waterfront to provide more community access to the waterfront and more recreation and entertainment opportunities. And then also a shift of the employment center industrial along the eastern edge of the project. Under Alternative A, a small portion of the site, this strip that's located along 3rd Street would be downtown high density residential, then with the majority of the Johns Manville site remaining downtown medium density residential. Alternative B is similar to alternative A. However, there would be no high density residential. So the residential portion would be all downtown medium density residential. And then the entire portion of the site that is north of 3rd Street would be marina commercial. And then alternative C, the existing general plan provides for downtown medium density residential, as well as some commercial, marina commercial or marine commercial, and then the industrial designation with some of those strips of park uses shown as well. And under this alternative, under alternative A, we would see the most residential growth with about 429 housing units, about 422 housing units under alternative B, and then 341 under alternative C. The 3 alternatives would yield similar amounts of non-residential development, with alternatives A and B both having about 0.6 million square feet of non-residential growth, and then alternative C having about 500,000. Area C is located in the vicinity of Railroad Avenue, Central Avenue, East 12th Street, and Solari Avenue. And this is the area where the Raymar Food site is. It's also where the city has a corporation yard. So the intent of the changes in this area under alternatives A and alternatives B are to encourage and increase workforce housing. So there aren't significant land use changes. You'll see some changes to the low density residential that reflect approved projects. And so there's not necessarily a huge change in the residential potential, but really the focus that you would see under alternatives A and B would to be adding new policies and programs in the general plan that encourage employee housing or housing in conjunction with the red service commercial uses. Area D is the area directly south of Highway 4 that's located between Railroad Avenue and Leverage Avenue. This is within the Railroad Avenue specific plan area, right next to the BART station. So this area is an exciting area because there's a lot of existing development there, but also a lot of opportunity for revitalization and growth. And there are some BART-owned parcels in this area that you'll see under all 3 of the alternatives. Any BART-owned land is governed now by a state law that requires those sites to develop at minimum densities and maximum floor area ratios. So we would see the same amount of growth or comparable growth on these speckled parcels where it says the BART TOD overlay under all 3 alternatives. They just wouldn't be called out under alternative C, but the state laws would continue to apply related to development on those sites. So the main shift in this area is that you'll see where the, I think it's the Ferguson air conditioning business right here, that would shift to commercial from the former business commercial designation. So you'd see a shift to commercial along Leverage to just increase commercial uses in the vicinity of Leverage and Highway 4. And then we'll see in alternative A that we have a large amount of employment center industrial. And this is just to take advantage of this area's close proximity to Highway 4 and freeway access in this area to provide increased industrial uses and employment generating uses, office uses, technology uses, etc. In this area. There would continue, excuse me, there would continue to be a lot of potential for mixed use development. So under alternative A, this perimeter here of the western portion of Area D would continue to be designated mixed use railroad, the Railroad Avenue SPA designation. And that provides about 60 to 65 units per acre, I think. Under alternative B, there would be a larger amount that's designated as mixed use. So we'd see more potential for residential growth under alternative B. And then alternative C would be fairly similar to alternative B. And so what we see under these alternatives is that we have the most potential for residential growth under alternative C with 11,651 units, and then the least amount of growth potential for residential growth potential under alternative A with about 1,141 new residential units. alternatives A and B would both also provide the most non-residential development, both at about 1.9 million square feet of non-residential growth, while alternative C, the existing general plan, would have about 1.2 million square feet of non-residential growth. Moving on to alternative E, area E, which is our new focus area. This looks at the Pittsburgh City Plaza and Atlantic Plaza area of the city. And this focus area is intended to examine application of the new mixed-use community commercial land use designation. So the city has a number of mixed-use designations currently. And under alternative B, we've created a mixed-use community commercial designation that's applied to areas with existing shopping centers where we really want to provide opportunities to revitalize those shopping centers by increasing residential uses while continuing to retain a retail and services focus in those areas. So it allows just more rooftops, more residents that would directly support those businesses and increase residential use in those areas. And so we've seen that applied in alternative B. In alternative A, the Pittsburgh City Plaza area, and then the vacant residential site to the east of that would be designated high density residential and medium density residential. So you'll see that under alternative A, we have the most potential for residential growth with 295 units in this area. But under alternative B, even though we have not as much land directly designated residential, there's still a significant amount of residential growth opportunity with 250 units due to the application of the mixed-use community commercial designation. And then alternative C, the existing general plan, would have the least potential for residential growth, 58 units, but the most potential for non-residential growth, which is about 181,755 square feet. With that, that's the overview of the 3 land use alternatives, as well as how those alternatives affect the individual focus areas. So what does this mean to you, and how can you tell us, and how can the rest of the community tell us how they feel and what they want to see? We've developed a land use alternative survey that's available on the website, and the city is getting the word out about the survey through a number of mechanisms. So there's a billboard ad out that broadly displays the survey information, where to go to respond to the survey. And then there's also at the BART reader board, there's also an ad that's going through, so that information is there. The city's put information regarding the alternatives report in the survey and water bill inserts. And then we have you, the stakeholders, to also get the word out to your communities and your groups. And then the city will also do a series of social media posts on its accounts to generate interest in the survey and make sure that the community is reading the alternatives report and letting us know which alternative they like best and why. The information is available on the website. And then at the close of the survey, this City Council and Planning Commission will have a series of joint meetings where they discuss the land use alternatives, where they consider the community's input, and they select the preferred alternative. So in terms of the stakeholders, we are hoping that you will let us know what you think about the alternatives, but also that you'll really help us foster some community involvement by reaching out to your organizations and contacts, encouraging them to review the land use alternatives and capacity report and to take the survey. And just like we've done with the other surveys that have been part of this process, all of the survey results will be available online and they'll be shared with the decision makers. So we keep verbatim all of the comments and all of the feedback we get will be put into the land use alternatives survey report. And as we go through the alternatives with the decision makers, we'll let them know what we heard from the community, what the preferences were related to each of the alternatives and each of the focus areas. In terms of taking the survey, there's a number of questions in this survey. There's a lot of information in the land use map alternatives, and we could have a 60-page survey to really go through the bits and pieces and the delve into the details and the weeds of each of the alternatives, but we kept a pretty big picture. And so when you go through to take the survey, we provide an infographic for each of the overall land use map alternatives, and we want to know just overall which of the land use map alternatives you prefer and why. Is it because it creates more jobs? Is it because it has more housing growth? Because it looks at open space and natural resource preservation? Why do you want that? Why do you like that land use alternative? And then for each of the focus areas, we have the same questions. Which land use map alternative do you prefer for a focus area? There might be one alternative that the community likes better for the city overall, but they like a different alternative for one or more of the focus areas. And then why you prefer a specific alternative for each focus area. And then of course, we also have an opportunity for additional feedback, anything related to the general plan update and the brownfields revitalization planning effort that the community wishes to share. So that's the best way for us to get consistent feedback across the board from all the stakeholders in the community. As I mentioned, we're going to take all of that information and go to the City Council and Planning Commission. We're currently kind of here in the middle, the Land Use Alternatives and Capacity Report. And our next steps are to go to the City Council and Planning Commission and come up with a preferred land use map. And concurrent with this effort of developing the preferred land use map, we're also preparing the updated general plan policy sets, focusing first on youth and recreation, community health, sustainability, conservation, economic development. So we're preparing those revised policy sets as well. And those will be coming to the Planning Commission and City Council after we've gone through and looked at the land use map and developed a preferred alternative there. And as for how that fits into the overall process, so this is a more detailed look of the overall general plan update process than the earlier graphic we had at the beginning of the presentation. But we're basically at this fourth step, the land use alternatives and capacity report, which we're completing the survey. So the survey is available online until mid-April, April 19th. And then at the close of that, we'll go back to the Planning Commission and City Council and get their feedback. We're developing the general plan policy sets, which are the updated goals, policies, and programs in the general plan this spring and summer. The draft general plan and draft EIR will also be out this summer as we finish up the general plan policy sets. And then following that with the adoption hearing, draft general plan and final EIR and final adoption. And of course, these dates are estimates. We could move faster if we get direction really quickly. Sometimes it takes a little longer depending on just how the decision-making process goes. But overall, we're planning to wrap up this process by the end of the year. So with that said, we have a couple of contacts with the city, and Hector introduced himself at the start of this presentation. Hector is the main contact for Envision Pittsburg. And then Sarah Belafonte is the city's main contact for the Brownfields revitalization planning effort. So both of their emails on this page. So you're welcome to email information directly. If you have any requests for additional information, if you want to talk about the different, how this process is going or the different land use alternatives, you may email them directly. I do hope all of your feedback will be provided via the survey as well, though. That way we have just an equal opportunity for all community members to provide their input. And so any input you provide via the survey will just be weighted consistently with the rest of the community. So we're hoping that you all will respond to that. And then that's available, of course, on the Envision Pittsburg website. So with all of that, do you have any questions about the alternatives and the overall process?
Beth, I do want to thank you for that wonderful presentation. I know it's a lot, but trust me, she broke it down as simple as we can do, and we always struggle with these land use, reports. Again, I mentioned it's about 50 or 60 pages long, so I really appreciate Beth's capacity to be able to break things down visually. So I hope you saw that effort there on behalf of the city and the consultant. What I'd like to do is actually, just so that we make sure that folks have a fair chance to comment, since we're on Zoom, if you guys could use the raise hand feature within the app, and then I think that will provide for an orderly way to have everyone make their comments. So I see one here. And I will start from the top of the list, starting with Susan.
Thank you, Hector. Thank you, Beth. That was a great presentation, and you did distill a lot of complicated information into some very good graphs. I have to tell you that the initial survey that we took back in the fall or in late August was a complicated survey. So for you to get all that together and distill it down into the forms that you did is impressive. My first question is going to be, what is your deadline to get people to complete the survey? It looks like it's April. Is that fair?
April 19th.
April 19th. Okay, so we are essentially looking at less than 4 weeks to get out to our groups and get them to propel them to complete the survey. Right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And so what is your capacity goal? I mean, last time I think we talked about, I don't know, 1,000 or 100. I remember those two numbers being bantered around. What is your goal this time?
We always would like to see as many surveys as possible. So the hope is that the community is engaged and the community responds. It's a lot of information and it's a lot to go through. So I don't think we'll necessarily have 5,000 responses to the survey, but I'm hoping that we have upwards of a couple hundred, more than we had from the previous surveys, so that we continue to grow on that.
Okay, so a couple hundred. Okay. And I haven't looked at the survey. I was just trying to go out while you were talking to see if I could pick it up off of the city website. Because I spent a fair amount of time going through all the reports, the economic trends, the alternative, all three that you listed here, plus the economic trends. And it seemed to me that some things have shifted within what happened in past surveys or pop-ups or workshops and what I'm seeing here. So for instance, I'm seeing areas A, B, and C, and D, and E. Only a couple of those seem to coincide with the brownfield revitalization plans. And there seems to be a new area, the Atlantic Plaza and the Pittsburgh City Plaza. Is that correct?
So yes, this is an expansion of what you saw in the brownfield survey. So this has the citywide map for the entire city. It includes all 4 areas that were included in the brownfield survey, and then one new area as well. Okay. And it is more simplified than the previous survey. So we're hoping people can go through it a little more easily.
Yeah, it was challenging to get through that one. It was. Okay. Okay, those are my questions for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan. We're going to go over to Zoe.
Great, thank you. And yeah, thanks for a really great presentation. And I did have an opportunity to look through the land use document, and it was, very thorough. And I know that, every city, including Pittsburgh, has a much higher RHNA number, and I really appreciated all of the different housing types that you are including in all of the alternatives. I mean, definitely in alternative A, but in all of the alternatives. I didn't hear sea level rise mentioned throughout the presentation, and I know it's something that you guys are thinking about, but I see all the shoreline properties that you talked about, really prioritizing open space. So I imagine there are some green infrastructure elements that are being considered, but I was wondering if you could maybe talk about that for a little bit. And also I'm curious what level of sea level rise you guys are planning for.
So have you had a chance to look at the existing conditions report?
I don't think I have.
Okay, so the existing conditions report does include a whole chapter on climate adaptation and sea level rise, and it looks at the adapting to rising tides as well as the CalAdapt sea level rise projections for Pittsburgh. And so we're not necessarily picking a specific scenario that we're absolutely going to put our stake in the ground on and say that this is the scenario we have to address, but we're looking at all of those and how those all could potentially be affected by growth. So what will come out of this effort will be the preferred land use map. And once we know what those land uses will be along the shoreline, we'll look at different methods to address adaptation and sea level rise. And that will be addressed in more through the policies in the general plan, the policies and implementation measures to ensure that as development occurs in the future, it is taking that into consideration that the city is continuing to address that potential.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. And I want to apologize to Manisha. I accidentally lowered her hand, but she rightfully just raised it back up. So you're up next.
No worries. Beth, thank you so much for that overview. I had a few questions, but I just want to start by asking, how do we, or is there a plan to provide some sort of overview or walkthrough for the community similar to what we just went through to sort of guide them through this process? Because I mean, I looked at the survey this week and it felt very overwhelming and daunting, even though it was simpler than the previous one. And so just keeping that in mind, how do we ensure accessibility of content and also ensure that the survey is available, for example, in Spanish? That was something that was reiterated in the previous one, that even though the website is in multiple languages, the survey itself is not in multiple languages. And so I'm just thinking a little bit about accessibility. I'll pause there and then I have a few other questions.
I will go back and make sure that the survey is available in Spanish. There should be a translate feature on it, and we'll double check that that's active and available. We did have the previous survey available in Spanish. We didn't have a lot of takers, but we did have that available as well. And so we'll make sure that this is available in Spanish. In terms of getting the word out to the community, we have a few upcoming workshops. So we'll be having another stakeholders workshop. And of course, the community is welcome to attend that as well as a community-oriented workshop where we'll walk through the alternatives and have a chance for people to understand what those mean to their future and get an idea about what the alternatives are signify without having to read through the entire land use alternatives and capacity report. So we'll definitely be distilling it down for the community.
Are those, that's wonderful. Are those dates intended for prior to the April 19th deadline?
Absolutely.
Okay. Great. And then I did have a question a little bit more about the content. And I know that you mentioned some guiding principles for this general plan, and equity and environmental justice didn't seem to be centered there or mentioned as a guiding principle. As a community that is predominantly lower income and a community of color, and also a frontline community that bears a lot of environmental injustices, we as a group really think that equity and EJ should be prioritized as a guiding principle. And like, how do our general plans and climate plans not only like build climate and environmental capacity and economic capacity, but also sustain the livelihoods of the communities that reside here? And so just curious to know how EJ and equity are being centered in this work.
Absolutely. So there will be a section of the general plan, and environmental justice is an interesting topic because it really relates to a lot of the elements of the general plan. It relates to how land uses interface with one another. It relates to access to services and access to infrastructure, parks and recreation, the ability for all people to, raise their economic standing and have access to the city's amenities and resources. And so we'll have a goal and policy set that specifically addresses environmental justice. And then I'm anticipating we'll also have a number of goals and policies in the general plan that kind of point, a discussion that basically points the reader to the mobility section, to the parks and recreation section, to the youth section, so that really that it is interwoven throughout the general plan. And we don't just have a small set of policies and goals that address it. So definitely equity and environmental justice are a big part of this. In terms of the themes that we heard from the community, that was the feedback we got during the visioning process. Those were when we went through all of the comments and we distilled them down, these were the main things we were hearing from the community. And I think without people necessarily coming out and saying the word equity, I think the anticipation was that there would be improved access to resources and services for community members, particularly disadvantaged community members. So we are taking that into account as we're looking at the various land use maps. Once we have a preferred land use map, we will be looking at the various disadvantaged communities. So as part of the existing conditions report, we did have a whole section on environmental justice that identified the disadvantaged communities in Pittsburgh and what factors led to those areas being designated as a disadvantaged community. So we will be looking specifically at those areas, at the land uses in those areas, and if there are any shifts or transitions that need to be made, or if there's any methods of buffering, or if there are sensitive receptors, we'll be making sure that those aren't overly exposed to the heavier and more intense uses. So we'll definitely be taking a look at the land use map and adding that layer on once we've heard what the preferred land uses are, but it's absolutely woven throughout this process.
Beth, I would just
Thank
quickly want
you.
to add that in terms of the things that we're looking at and incorporating into our general plan policies that weren't necessarily brought out to the forefront during the visioning process, climate change and adaptation resiliency. One of the ones that you didn't mention, Beth, I wanted to make sure the group knew that we're focusing on too for the general plan update is health and all policies and community health and wellness. So that's an additional topic area that we are very excited to interweave throughout the general plan. So appreciate your comments, Manisha. And then I see that Linda has her hand raised next.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to give the public a chance to engage and see what Pittsburgh is up to. Your last comment was one of my questions. In the opening, I was quite surprised to see, in your list of topics that climate change was not even included. And certainly environmental justice was, as it's required, but I agree with the previous commenter that equity is an important element, but it's definitely an important element when selecting alternatives. And I found that tonight's exercise sort of interesting with the focus on jobs versus homes, but really without a more in-depth discussion, not only what Zoe mentioned about the impacts of sea level rise and what you mentioned will be coming later about, climate change, the impacts on the various options. It leaves one ill-equipped to adequately reply to the survey. And, I went through the process. It's interesting too that the survey keeps bouncing around. 1 minute, decreased cars is first in line, later it's 11th in line, and the third time it doesn't even show up. So it'd be the same with climate change is not showing up on there. But, the whole issue that we're facing in the Bay Area, certainly we need the jobs because we want to reduce the transportation and we want to reduce the traffic footprint, but we also want to be aware of the impacts of sea level rise. So I just feel like a lot of this is still in a silo and it's a little confusing to me. And I'm a former mayor and council member, but it's just still very overwhelming on, when will all these elements be reviewed, in a way that it's not just a ABC option. So our environmental stakeholders group submitted a bunch of comments and a vision for a general plan revision back on March 2020. And I get it that staff has to do, these pieces at a time. We have to look at the land use first, but it just, I don't understand, even as I consider myself an expert in this area, of how will these other issues in our comments that we had a dozen or so environmental groups put together, and when will they be incorporated at what stage? And how will you find that information and the public's input on these equity, climate crisis, environmental justice, sea level rise, what's going on with these parcels? We want infill housing, but how is that going to get to the out of the survey? I just don't see how that information, that important information, is going to get to the decision makers.
Beth, if I can jump in and respond to Linda's comment real quick. One of the things that I've had experience with in other general plan settings is that the opportunities for public input are a little bit more limited. And normally, at least in the settings that I've participated before, with the Richmond general plan, for example, we didn't necessarily have an in-depth conversation about land use alternatives. We really just jumped into the policies and the goals discussion. And that was kind of something that was happening in the background for the purposes of the environmental impact report. So I think, what we're trying to do as far as a city is to try to take each and every opportunity to provide, that public input in that forum. I think that, what everybody's really waiting for and chomping at the bit, including myself, is to see the draft, land use goals, the policies, all the different topic areas addressed. And that's really where, we're going to get really nuanced in terms of the sea level rise, the climate adaptation, health and all policies, That's really where the rubber's going to meet the road. But we're really trying to kind of just provide an expanded amount of opportunities for people to provide input. This is kind of a highly technical exercise in terms of just looking at the map and the different colors and what do they mean and densities and jobs per square feet. So admittedly, it's a lot to take in, but from where we're sitting at, we just want to give more and more opportunities to provide input. So at any point in the process, if you want to talk about policies that aren't necessarily even related to land use, definitely feel free to put a letter into the city. We'll keep track of those. And as we start to draft the policies for that public discussion, that'll help us with that respect. And I'm sorry, Beth, you can feel free to pick up where I left off.
I'll just follow up. You mentioned how do all these comments and how does this input get looked at? And as we're preparing the land use alternatives map, we went back through every visioning workshop and we looked at the maps that people drew and the comments they'd written down on on their little post-it notes or their group activities. So we went back and we looked at all of that as we were preparing the land use maps. We didn't just look at the most recent opportunity area survey, but we went back through the whole process and looked at the input we had. And as we're developing the general plan goals and policy sets, we're going to look back at those comments. We'll look at all of the written comments that are submitted as part of this activity. So we'll make sure that those comments are captured, because it is hard when you have a general plan. It's a large document that has the umbrella is broad and it covers a lot of topics. And so there are a lot of points in the process where we're focusing on land use, or at one point we'll probably be focusing on climate adaptation, and people may say, hey, I'm worried about services, I'm worried about recreation, where's that discussion? And so throughout this process, we always have to kind of go back and go through all of the comments, comb through them, and make sure we're really capturing the community's concerns and priorities. In terms of not addressing climate adaptation, I'm guessing you're referring back to those topics that are included in the general plan. Climate adaptation is included under the safety element. So when you look at the government code requirements for a safety element, part of that's including climate adaptation. So it's tacitly included there without specifying that. And that was one of the bills and changes we've mentioned that we're addressing as part of this general plan update are the new state laws for climate adaptation. And regarding the survey jumping around, so the questions they have the same answers for every question, but they're randomized. Sometimes when you have a survey, people tend to start choosing the first 4 answers, or they'll choose the same things again and again. So it's randomized to ensure that people are really reading all of the options every time. So we specifically chose to randomize the responses or options. So I apologize if it's disconcerting. It was intended to ensure that we got a better response and kept people kind of thinking about all of the options as they went through each of those maps and as they went through each of the focus areas.
All right, we're going to go to Jan Warren next.
Okay, thanks for having this presentation and allowing us to participate. I've got kind of disjointed questions and comments. I'd like to start with the different maps and the fact that on the survey, you can you pick your favorite general, and then you can do the little piecemeal thing. And I wonder how that's going to be weighted when it's all put back together. I haven't heard maybe I missed it, it was in my car, but an overall vision for the community. I mean, y'all are, your city council is approving the big subdivisions from land use policies from 30 years ago. And so we do have to be thoughtful about the land. You need the jobs to generate the income. And I don't know if any of the areas you showed us tonight are include any unincorporated areas, and if that is syncing with the county at all. I'm curious, the railroad, everything seems to be primarily along, the waterfront up to 4 that you're focusing on. And if that's the case, then yeah, you really need to be sure about your rising sea level. But Railroad Avenue South, there's a lot of opportunity for, and it's going on. Y'all are building some multi-housing over there. We all know we need a lot more density And just this process, how many other groups have you had outreach with before us tonight? Because April 19th with Easter and Passover and all, it's I just wonder if there's enough time. Thanks.
And so just to respond to your question about the land use map, there are changes throughout the community. So we have the land use alternatives maps reflect a number of changes, not just in the focus areas, but throughout the community. So when you put the A, B, and C side by side, you'll see that there are a number of changes, including changes in the city's sphere of influence, as well as within the city limits. We kept the focus areas to continue to get feedback on those specific areas. But we're anticipating is that when we take this to the decision makers, we're going to let them know overall, here's what the city or what the community liked in terms of a land use map. And then here are the different focus areas that received the most votes. And we can put that together as, the starting point for discussions as, here's what the land use map looks like with each of those areas shown. So there's definitely, we'll be able to provide that. And then even at the close of this process, when this goes to the City Council and Planning Commission, they will be continuing to consider public input. So if people are concerned, you start hearing discussion on one of the alternatives and you're like, wait a second, I totally disagree and that's not the direction I want that alternative to go. You're welcome to send an email for the Council and Planning Commission to consider, or you're also welcome to attend those meetings and to provide your comments verbally. And the preferred land use map is also not the last bite at the apple. It's basically, here's the land use map that we're going to analyze. We're going to prepare a draft EIR that looks at the environmental implications of that map. And as part of the draft EIR, we'll have another set of alternatives where we have significant and unavoidable environmental impacts. We're going to be identifying potential tweaks and refinements to the land use map to address those. So there will continue to be a number of changes that are being considered. But basically, this cements the preferred land use map. Once the City Council and Planning Commission have selected their preferred alternative, that cements that map for the purposes of the environmental review and for preparing the draft general plan. But we do anticipate that we'll see other refinements as the decision makers review that map in light of the EIR and in light of additional community comments that are received throughout this process.
Thank you, Beth. I just wanted to piggyback on your comments and say, in terms of how many meetings we've had before this is our first meeting since we've released the Land Use Alternatives Capacity Report. Like Beth mentioned during her presentation, we will be having 2 additional ones that are actually more focused around, going through an overview with the community and actually taking in comments. And I think what we were hoping for tonight is that, again, you guys represent different constituencies with different topics that you guys are really, excited about or concerned about. And so we're hoping that you'll help us with that outreach, whether it be by identifying specific groups in the city that you work with already, that we can do that outreach to, or, already just bringing folks to those 2 meetings that are upcoming. We do have the actual dates and the times to share with you at some point tonight. And then we'll be definitely putting those up on our general plan website for everybody to, save the date. And then I also wanted to mention that the April 19th deadline for comments is kind of a soft deadline, if you will. It is for me because I am aware that, this is a lot of information to take in. And sometimes it takes a lot more time, especially if you were trying to reach a broader audience. We fully expect that we may end up extending that deadline a little bit, but we do want to have at least, a 30-day kind of deadline to start with, just to keep the ball moving. We don't want to end up, a situation where, we're 3 years into the project and we're still talking about land use alternatives. So we do want to move the discussion forward, but at least the April 19th deadline is a soft deadline that could easily be moved depending on whether we look back and see the amount of comments that we've gotten. We make a decision that we have quality comments, or if we don't have enough, that's something that we could sit back and evaluate, and also the council could give us additional direction in terms of reaching other audiences. So I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. So we're going to go over to Peter.
I'll unmute myself so I can talk. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I did read the reports and I did the survey. So I got a chance to go through the whole thing page by page. And I had several different reactions. One, the wealth of material in the reports and in the survey, if you read the preamble so you understand what you're actually responding to in the survey, can be confusing. It can be confusing to try to work your way through all that, since all of us are not planners and we don't understand the lingo. It'd be particularly confusing for the uninformed. Some of us have been lucky to have been part of this process from the beginning. And so we know what's come before and we know what we're looking at. Somebody hitting it cold might not have the same experience. And I think that you really need to think about that as a planner, Hector, and try to say, how can I talk about this in terms of apples and oranges and not in terms of the language that you're normally used to? I think that would, I don't know how you do that, particularly when you're doing a virtual survey, virtual process. If you were doing an in-person process, it would probably be simplified to some extent, but that's one comment. I mentioned one other thing. Certain parts of the survey relate to particular neighborhoods in Pittsburgh. And if you can figure out a way to let people respond by neighborhoods, or at least to make sure you focus into the neighborhoods where plots of land exist that planning items relate to, you're likely to get one, a better turnout, and two, you're going to get what people in that neighborhood think about. And what you could have done if you were doing in person is you could have had meetings around the city and invited people from those neighborhoods to come. You can't do that now, but there's got to be a way in terms of IT that you can identify and target audiences. And I think that you would get a much better response rate and much more accurate feedback from people who would take the time to do it because it related to something that was right next door to them. I know that when I did it, I look at the whole city, sure, but I live down by the waterfront. And so I'm particularly looking at the old PG&E, the old power plant, and I'm looking at the 3rd Street, Harbor 3rd Street, because that's right on both sides of me. I look carefully at the other places too, but I would focus on those because that's whatever's gonna happen there is gonna affect me. So just a suggestion. If you can, in your survey, get reactions to the overall values that you're trying to pay attention to. I'm not sure they came through as values, but more as planning items. And I think of the comment earlier about climate change or justice and things like that. And it may have been in there, but it just didn't pop out at me. And so just a comment. And the last thing I'd say is when you offer people choices, why did you pick this? Pick 2. I would have liked to have had 3. I would have enjoyed having one more because there was one more in there that made a difference to me. And I don't know whether or not that's beyond something that you would do normally in a survey. You just give people 2 choices because you get them to focus. But I certainly would have loved to have had 3 choices. But I did the whole thing, and it is a good process. And you're really working hard to get feedback from people in the city. But as you say, it's something that doesn't happen as frequently as you might think. And it's going to really affect what's going to happen to Pittsburgh in the future. Did you ask us also to say if we preferred an alternative over another?
No, we just asked you to identify your preferred alternative, not if you liked it more than or less.
Oh, identify the preferred. Well, I went through and I kept on focusing on, I read the information. The first one, A, I responded well with that, but when I went through and did the survey, I ended up picking B most of the time. And I think that had to do with the fact that I really focused on the value of jobs in Pittsburgh, and that we don't want to just continue to build housing without having opportunities for people to be employed. And when you really looked at the numbers, in many cases, there wasn't that much difference between the numbers between A and B for population and people. It had to do with the availability of jobs. And I'll be frank too, and also say that where I thought the high density development should take place, housing and things like that, was up towards 4 on the other side of 4. And I thought that, you know, and I'm talking about my perceptions, and again, it has to do with my neighborhood. I think down near the waterfront, more open space, more less density, more small commercial that people will come to, restaurants and things like that. There's a lot that could happen down here, but I would think the density would take place on the up towards 4 on the other side, because that's where you have access to the major transportation networks. So thank you.
Peter, I just want to start off by saying I really appreciate your constructive criticism. I do take that to heart, and I kind of, you know, it kind of reinforces for me that starting this process and looking at the planner speak and looking at the amount of data and narrative, that was something that we actually did discuss with our consultant, is how can we, you know, make this more visual, simplify it. So we did take a stab at it, and that's kind of where the infographic came out of. But I do want to, you know, just let you know that we are looking at just the messaging and having folks be able to understand that. Obviously, we'll continue to try and do better. But that's definitely on the top of our minds as we, you know, put this information out, because it's hard enough to get people to come to a planning meeting already, and even more so if they don't understand what it is that they're being asked to comment on. So I appreciate that comment, and also the comment about, you know, doing workshops by neighborhood. Yes, we are in a pandemic still, and we can't meet person to person, but we do have wonderful social media that folks use, like Nextdoor. And through Nextdoor, we can, you know, very surgically look at the neighborhoods where people are subscribing, and potentially that is an idea that, you know, Beth and I can talk about, maybe doing virtual workshops, you know, by the focus area neighborhoods, not necessarily for each and every neighborhood, but certainly where the largest amount of change is forecasted. We could definitely try our best to hold those meetings and basically have, hopefully people, you know, come. We could definitely host the meetings, but, you know, one of the things I like about this one is we have about 20 people, you know, at this meeting, which is great. So I hope that we would have something like that for each of the neighborhood workshops. But, you know, again, we could just try our best. And that's where we're kind of asking for your guys' help as well, is to try to drum up that interest and support for looking at this whole process. So again, I just wanted to mention that I appreciated your constructive criticism.
Thank you. And I would speak for Susan too, who also lives in my general neighborhood, that I'm sure there were people here that would be willing to work with you to get people to turn out to a neighborhood meeting. Thank you.
Absolutely. That's what our job is, right?
So. You have my contact information. We do have these upcoming workshops that we're going to be posting on the website. So that's the next immediate opportunity, but we will be talking with our consultant again to see what we could do within the budget that we have to do additional meetings, because I do think it is important. So we're going to pivot over to Luz.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, great.
I'm able to unmute. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Luz Gomez. I work with Contra Costa Public Health. I'm the Building Healthy Communities Manager, and it is such a pleasure to have a chance to participate in this. And thank you, City of Pittsburgh, for inviting us. The city has always been a great partner for many health initiatives that the county has implemented. So I'm looking forward to providing some comments on the community health and wellness and health in all policies efforts that will be coming forth a little bit later. So happy to plug in there. We just finished in the county providing comments from the entire public health and the entire health department on the county's environmental justice policy document. So as the city of Pittsburgh is doing this process, so is the county for all the unincorporated areas. So I'll be more than happy to be able to share the wisdom that was sort of gathered for that process with the city of Pittsburgh. I apologize, I came in late and you probably mentioned something related to the climate action plan, but I'm hoping that you guys are working on them at about the same time. That's what the county is doing and that seems to be working well, so awesome.
Thank you,
And
Lou.
then,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, and then I just have one related comment that is more because of personal experience where I live. Whenever you guys used the mixed use definition of land use, please be careful to make sure that you very clearly define what mixed use entails, because we have seen, at least in the jurisdiction where I live, that some developers have proposed 100% housing units in what's considered a mixed use zone. So just a word of caution to make sure that you guys have a really good tight definition for that. But other than that, also good to see some former friends and partners that I've worked with throughout my career here. So it feels like coming home. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Definitely thank you for being able to join us. One thing I did want to mention, because you did mention the climate action plan, we are in our environmental affairs division working on a climate action plan that is running in a parallel fashion with the general plan update. And one of the biggest milestones that they're waiting on in order for them to start cranking out their numbers is this land use alternative, specifically the preferred land use alternative, so that they could see out of all these alternatives what the GHG and emissions impact are going to be from the different sectors: residential, industrial, commercial, from the city side. I know we have Sarah in the lobby too, so I don't know if you want to add anything on to what you and Laura are doing with the climate action plan, Sarah.
Yes, and I apologize for having my camera off. I had some unforeseen family circumstances today, and I'm, as you can tell, not in my office. But yes, we kicked off the drafting of the climate action plan with an updated greenhouse gas emissions study. We did that last year, and it is on the city's website. I should probably put it onto the Engage Pittsburgh website as well. So I'll be writing myself a note to do that. Regarding kind of the rest of the process, it is going to have a lot to do with the land use alternatives and kind of the step we're on right now. So we will be making a lot more. I apologize, give me 1 second. I apologize. My kid is getting out of the emergency room right now and she's getting into the car. So everybody's fine, but that's the noise you're hearing in the background. I'm going to make this brief. We are working on the land use alternatives and they will heavily influence our climate action plan. So more progress and quicker progress to come as we get this kind of section of Envision Pittsburgh through and to City Council and Planning Commission for input. And then you'll really see the climate action plan start to ramp up.
Thank you, Sarah. And I just want to quickly give a shout out to you because you got some stuff going on. And just to let you guys know, I told Sarah we could handle it. We got your back. And she's, so part of this process and still wanting to be involved. So she's still with us. So I want to thank her for doing that, amid that emergency.
It is my pleasure. Thank you, guys.
You're welcome. All right, Zoe, round two for you.
All right, great. Round two. Perfect. Okay, I had a few questions that came up. One actually, and a comment, related to the climate change and environmental justice. I totally, hear what you're saying and fully believe that you will include it throughout. I would recommend for all future documents, if you are planning on, centering climate change and environmental justice, to, mention it throughout all of your documents. I don't think it's something that can be implied. And then I had a couple logistical questions. I know this is a short timeline, and I know you aren't putting the event. I see the events aren't up on the website yet. I was curious when the events will be up. We would love to, help promote them, but I think, we don't have. There's not, time is short. And then another logistical question would be, I fully agree that most of my questions are related to like the policy piece, which I know was not this moment, so I'm refraining from sharing most of my comments. But I was wondering when would be an appropriate time to share those comments.
Thank you for your question. All great questions. Beth, if you wouldn't mind actually going back to the slideshow with the timeline for the upcoming milestones, I think that might give us a really good idea. Take all of this with a grain of salt, because this is based on meeting the April 19th deadline, and really having a clear picture of where folks want to go, moving forward with the joint study sessions, and really having very productive and successful City Council Planning Commission meetings where we get clear input. However, as you can probably tell, this general plan, like any other general plan in other cities, may get controversial. There might be big picture questions that are not easy to answer. So, we keep having to pivot from time to time in terms of the time frame. But to answer your question, if we were moving in a fashion, where we're meeting all our marks and milestones, the appropriate time to have that conversation about policies is basically in the spring and summer of this year. And that's why we don't have specific dates, obviously, because we've been at this for a year and a half. And for the most part, when we put specific dates on the schedule, we tend to miss them because, we're taking longer than we thought in the analysis or getting the information out, or there's some big picture questions that come up that really need more additional thought. So again, just take this with a grain of salt, but technically what this should say to you is spring or summer of this year. If you're interested in having that conversation, you haven't heard from us, that would be a good time to check in with us to see, how we're doing on meeting our milestones and when the opportune time to bring up that policy discussion is going to be. Having said that, there's nothing from, stopping anybody here in this Zoom meeting or anybody out in the public from putting together a detailed bullet list of all the policy issues that you have or specific best practices that you want to share. I know that you guys have shared that with us in the past. I don't know if you are talking about something more specific than that, but there's nothing in those policy sets topic-wise that we disagree with or want to disinclude. Everything is on the table, and we're looking at it, from the same perspective that you guys are. So I think that that's good news. Unfortunately, we don't have specific policy language for you to review at this point because we haven't gotten to that point yet, just to be frank. So hopefully that kind of addresses your question. I think you might have had another kind of part of that.
Yeah, that answers my question. I do have a couple other questions. I also would recommend possibly extending the timeline. I totally get that things come up, but I think this timeline does look, very short, and I don't think there's a lot of, time built in for feedback around the policies themselves. And so, that would be my recommendation there. And then I may have just misread the maps, but I didn't see the urban limit line mentioned throughout the document. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that. I know there was a heated conversation on the recent Faria development, which I understand is, moving forward, also not the time and place to talk about that. But I do want to make sure that something like that does not happen again in that same way, as much as I am in favor of development. And I was wondering, what the urban limit line conversation is in this land use.
Yeah, Beth, I don't know if you want to take a first stab at that. I definitely have some comments on it, but turn the forum over to you for a sec.
Okay, so when we have the draft policy sets out, the land use element and the growth management element will both include discussion of the urban limit line, pictures showing where the urban limit line is, and a policy set related to implementing and maintaining the urban limit line. So there, it will be addressed in land use and growth management.
Yeah, and nothing, I was just gonna add, nothing in the general plan alternatives proposes to change the urban limit line. Everything is fully within the boundaries of the ULL. And if I can just say, you know, one of the tenets of the general plan moving forward is to focus on infill and transit-oriented development. We also have new legislative kind of mandates in terms of looking at environmental impacts from a vehicle miles traveled perspective. So projects moving forward, we're going to be looking at their impacts in terms of either reducing or increasing VMT, the vehicle miles traveled between, you know, housing and jobs and that kind of stuff. So hopefully that kind of gives you some insight in terms of, you know, what perspective we're looking at that issue from.
Yeah.
One thing you mentioned that I just recalled that is really important to share, we do have the dates picked out for the 2 workshops, and literally at around 11 o'clock today, we got together with Beth to finalize that. So we haven't shared that just because we wanted to make sure that we took a look at all the calendars for City Council, Planning Commission, that we weren't conflicting with any at least advertised community meetings that we're aware of. But the workshops are going to occur on April 8th, and that is going to be a morning meeting at 10 a.m. So again, that's April 8th, 10 a.m. And then the second workshop we have slated for April 12th in the evening at 6 p.m. We're looking initially to make those both at 6 p.m., but we thought that it might be good to kind of provide folks with an option. It's going to be the same, you know, setup and forum. It's not going to be any different content or anything like that. So if you wanted to attend one or the other, you could do that depending on your time and availability. And again, I totally, you know, see your comment about additional time. I think what we want to probably do is keep the deadline as is and see where we're at that point on April 19th, see how much, you know, information's come in. More than likely we'll be extending it, but we do want to leave that timeline because when we do give a 2-month, you know, time period for comments, once we get the word out, people tend to forget about it. So at least there's a sense of urgency out there for the folks that we do get commenting in. We'll have that information. And then again, we could evaluate the quality and the quantity of the comments and, you know, pivot from there as needed.
Got it. I have one more question. I'm really sorry, everyone. Have you guys considered eliminating or reducing single family zoning? I know that's happening a lot around the region. And there seem to be a lot of, you know, both environmental and equity benefits to that. I see I assume you are, you know, meeting your arena goals with all of these versions, but yeah, curious if you had considered.
That's a perfect segue for me to kind of raise Pittsburgh up and say, we recently, there was a RENA-based, not survey, but basically a news group down in Southern California looked at the RENA targets and production throughout the state. And I forget how many jurisdictions there were, but only a very, very limited number, I want to say less than 10, got an A. And within Contra Costa County, that number, I don't think anybody got an A, but there were, I think, 3 jurisdictions that got a B and above, and we were one of the jurisdictions that got a B+. So as far as the RENA is concerned and providing affordable housing, I think we are on track on meeting our targets for this housing cycle. So I just wanted to bring it out to the forefront because it's definitely something that, you know, we've been working hard at and, you know, making sure that we accommodate along our transit corridors, and just in general, there's a huge need for affordable housing. So I think compared to other jurisdictions, Pittsburgh is, you know, doing very well in that respect. And then I'm sorry, did you have, what was the other part of that comment?
I think that answered my question.
Okay. All right, and then we have Linda. Linda, are you still with us? Okay. While we wait for Linda, maybe Manisha, do you want to jump in?
I think Trina had her hand up earlier,
It's been
so maybe Trina can go.
Okay, sure, that works. I'm sorry, and I apologize if I'm skipping anybody. I'm literally going down the list as it appears on the participants panel, so go for it.
Okay, my name is Trina, and Luce actually kind of picked up on the question I was going to ask about mixed use. Let's just say, you know, like the Manville property, you have residential and industry, or in the Atlanta Plaza, if you have retail and high density housing. If those territories are okayed for those kinds of operations, if it came up that you know, some big push came in to make it all one thing, would that automatically be accepted, or would it be rejected? So that you have to have the mixed use, you have to have both the retail and the high density apartments or condos or whatever, or you have the residential and let's say light industry. So I'm just wondering if you are, you know, you're thinking you might be voting for one thing on the survey, and really you're just giving license to, you know, some sort of big decision that you really may not be wanting.
Great question. Beth, do you want to jump in and try to address that one?
I will. And so we have not finished preparing the full land use element, which will have policies and guidelines related to the mixed use and how those mixed use designations are implemented. Currently, there is some flexibility in how mixed use is developed. In some cases, like when we were looking at the community commercial, the anticipation was definitely that would not be standalone residential, but that it would be residential in support of existing and future retail and services. But in some cases, you may have a mixed use development that doesn't have a residential component, but has a number of non-residential land use types. And state law also has taken away some of the city's discretion in approving projects in mixed use areas. So there are certain types of housing projects that have to be allowed by right in a mixed use designation. And so in some cases, the city would not have flexibility to require mixed use if those projects were to come forward. So and that will be addressed in more detail when the city updates its housing element and makes related changes to the zoning code. But there are definitely opportunities, regardless of how the city describes and defines mixed use, for certain developments to move forward. But when we have the land use element out with all of the mixed use language, we'll definitely be looking at that. And there are opportunities to require a mix of uses. So there are multiple ways to look at mixed use. Some communities require vertical mixed uses where you have a single building that has a variety of uses within that building. Some communities require horizontal mixed use where you have a parcel and you may have a standalone retail, commercial, office building and then a separate residential building. So there are ways to require mixed use. So currently we haven't determined exactly how all of that will be parsed out, but we have, if you look at the land use alternatives and capacity report, in table 3, we do describe each of the mixed use designations. There are 5 of them, and how those are anticipated to be implemented. So that can give you some more idea and feeling of how those are envisioned and the alternatives you're looking at. And one thing to keep in mind, and I noticed this in Peter's comment when he was saying that there seemed to be a lot of high density residential around the downtown, the mixed use designation is actually an extremely high density residential designation, and that the Pittsburgh, Bay Point, BART, the Railroad Avenue, and the community commercial designations would all allow fairly high densities and intensities that are higher than the very high density residential. So it's important to look at that table and really interpreting how those designations can be developed.
Yeah, and I just recalled, Zoe, when you were talking, I knew there was one more thing I wanted to chime in about, the elimination of single family zoning. For all intents and purposes, that's already been done. I know they're still trying to pass more legislation. to kind of call it something else, but really, you know, now in our single family zones, it's a by right zoning for ADUs, detached and attached. So on any single family property, essentially you could put a detached accessory dwelling unit and a small attached junior ADU. So, you know, just to kind of address your question is, you know, one of the biggest issues that cities are facing right now is the loss of local control. For better or for worse, I think that there's examples of both of that. But obviously, you know, we'll roll with whatever the state mandates and incorporate it into our planning policies. But I think that that train is slowly but surely, you know, leaving the station. All right, I'm gonna go over to Manisha, and then I'm gonna give Linda one last chance to maybe unmute herself and do her comment as well.
Yeah, thank you. I, similar to Zoe, am struggling to like not talk about the policy stuff and some of those pieces. I'll try to stay focused on the land use alternatives. I think one thing that I'm just very, very hesitant about when looking at this survey, and I think Linda's comments earlier kind of increased my sort of hesitation, is that how is this land use alternative survey going to be used? Especially considering that someone like myself who has been to this workshop, has been a part of this process, and still doesn't feel confident in the selections I'm going to be making in this survey. And I'm not really sure, like, you know, which of these options really makes sense. Like, I'm just kind of going for it and filling it out and not really sure how it's going to be used. And so I'm just a little concerned about this entire process because there's not a lot of room for like values. Like, what do I care about? Like, what is my priority in terms of this area? Like, yeah, so there's not a lot of space. It's very one or the other. And so I'm very hesitant about how this information is going to be used and how it's going to be translated to the council, who's going to see this as a community engagement effort and see it as a thorough engagement effort when in fact the community may not be as informed as possible. Sorry, my thoughts are all over the place right now, but does that kind of make sense? How is this going to be used? Is there, in this translation to council and into the general plan, is there going to be room for that, you know, idea that there's a lot of, like, not a lot of full information when people are filling the survey out? Sorry, I've been at my screen all day, so my words are tripping over each other, but
No, you're good.
I'll pause to see if that makes sense.
That absolutely makes sense. With any process like this, there are shortcomings. We can't understand every consideration and every priority of every community member. And so the fact that you have certain values you want to articulate and you want to see reflected in your votes and when you're selecting something, and there's a frustration because people have different priorities. So that doesn't mean that there's not room for those to be shared. But what this means is we will take the information from the land use alternatives survey and we'll provide all of the information to the city council. So you'll have an opportunity to have, you know, where you just add in your comment, you fill in the blank and you say, this is what I value, this is what I want to see here. So there's definitely the opportunity for that. But when we provide this to the city council, we're going to say, you know, here's alternative A, alternative B, and alternative C. The community, we got the most votes for alternative A, and people's top priorities with alternative A were X, Y, and Z. However, what people really liked were with alternative B, and I'm just picking alternatives here, were X, Y, and Z here. And so we're going to let them know what people liked about each alternative, what we heard, and then also some of the comments that are the written in comments, we'll let them know what those comments were as well. And we'll attach the full survey results so they can go through and they can read in detail every single comment. And then we'll do the same thing with each of the focus areas, identifying what was the preferred alternative, but then what people valued about each of the alternatives in terms of their priorities or preferences in selecting an alternative. What we anticipate is, in addition, so we're going to provide that to the council, that'll be in a staff report, that we're going to get feedback from the community saying, hey, you know, we see that overall alternative, you know, B was selected, but we really like X, Y, and Z about alternative A, and we hope you'll consider that. So the council is going to be hearing more and more input that responds to the alternatives report, and they'll be hearing the input that the community provides during this process. So there's definitely room for those values to be articulated and expressed separately from the survey. The survey is definitely not intended to represent, 100% of what the community wants. It's just a tool for the council to use to kind of see the big picture and what some of the overarching themes and preferences are of the community and kind of what direction they're hearing from the community in general. The council is going to take all of this and they're going to have, you know, how they interpret that information and how they think they meet the city's needs best, as will the planning commission. And so they're going to take that and interpret that and direct us to move forward with different land use configurations in different areas based on the collective feedback and not just the alternative survey results.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think my concern is just that if I don't know, like for example, like the land, like the sea level rise, or I'm not taking those considerations, like taking those into consideration when I'm filling out this survey, and my understanding is is not all encompassing of all the different pieces that are moving in the city and all the other decisions that are taking place in parallel. And I'm just looking at this kind of like in a, you know, just singly zoning in on this alternative and saying, do I prefer housing or do I prefer jobs? And not considering just the whole web of other sort of factors that play into that. I just don't know how reflective saying 20 people like alternative A for area A is going to be, how informative that's going to be when it reaches council, when there's just so much nuance that's missing from that. And so just the way that the survey is designed right now is, I think, very narrowed and siloed, and is preventing some of that nuance to be present in that space. And I'm just like worried because I know that when these reports go to council, it's like X number of residents said they like this alternative, and there's that nuance is missing. And I don't think the comment area is enough. So unfortunately, I'm hesitant about the survey design at a like higher level.
Manisha, I think, you know, what I would say to that is that, you know, part of this is trying to get different types of information to the council. Certainly data is very valuable. We have folks on the council that are data driven. You know, with our last survey, I think Beth mentioned we only had maybe 100 or so responses, but I think what was more useful is the actual information that they shared. You know, however many number of folks end up filling out the survey, I don't think that that's going to indicate to a council an overwhelming majority likes alternative A or B for whatever reason. I think it's going to be a compilation of both the data and also the comments that are received, you know, written fashion to the council, and also orally, you know, testimony that's provided during our joint council meetings. So it's not just a, here's a memo, this is what the community said. Obviously, you have an opportunity, like at any other council meeting or planning commission meeting, to go up to the mic and the podium, you know, share your 2 minutes or 3 minutes of comment. And I think that that is a way of introducing that value set that you mentioned, and also share, you know, your thoughts about the survey and, you know, how you think it could have been, you know, done better. You know, opportunities for improvement in the future, but again, different avenues for being able to comment on, you know, the general plan as a whole, not necessarily just the land use alternatives. All right, and I see, Linda, you're on a different Zoom account there. Do you want to jump in before we end the session there?
Sure, I think Manisha just summarized or re-summarized in a very great way. I'm actually curious. You've turned off the chat option for us to share emails with one another. I changed my name to our email address. I would love to chat with some people. So, I mean, what you're saying, Hector, I know the position you're in, but the reality is the survey didn't even give us the option to check off vehicle miles traveled. It didn't give us the option to check off equity. It didn't give us the option to check off multi-use, or the option to check off climate change or sea level rise. You know, and these are existential threats to the next generation, to all of us. And you're saying you'll weave them in, but you know, we gave you a letter. I can be blunt, you know, I think Greenbelt Alliance and others are trying to be polite, but I'll just be honest. I mean, we gave you these comments a year ago, and we don't even see it in the topics. We don't even see it as something we can check off. And then you're gonna take this report. I mean, I'm just disappointed. You know, I hear you, you're going to weave it in. And I even know some of the stuff you're not saying. If you put it in there, you have some council members who are going to freak out. I know that. I know that's some of what is going on here. But at the same time, I mean, it worries us that we pick an option, an alternative, when in fact, if I weigh in the vehicle miles traveled, if I weigh in the multi-use, if I weigh in the sea level rise, the urban limit line, all these things that you're assuring us will be weighed in, I just, you know, or not even us, not people on the call. This was supposed to be an I understood it to be an environmental justice meeting today. But other people, or the average bear who's trying to figure this out, that you're going to get 200 responses and say overwhelming, everybody picked item, you know, alternative B. And you won't know if it's because people want jobs, or they want equity, or they want housing, or they want vehicle miles traveled. So I don't know. It's just, it seems that some of the survey is a little outdated and would have been useful 10 years ago, but where we're at now with this issue that we're facing, I hoped for more, and I just doubt the validity of the survey. And I just, not even that, I just wish people had more of a voice and you could truly hear. If someone forgets to put in comments that they care about equity or vehicle miles traveled, or don't know that term vehicle miles traveled even means, that message isn't coming through loud and clear. And I just, I think I hoped for a little more, and I'm going to stay hopeful for more going forward. And I hope you'll pull out our earlier comments. And I love Manisha, and I'd love to find a way to be in touch with her and some of the other youth, because this is about them. This is their future. Us old ladies have been fighting for this stuff since the 70s, and it's time for them to kind of speak up and hear their voice heard. And I just want to thank them for coming to the meeting today and having the nerve to speak up and try their best to vocalize what they're hearing other people saying and what they're feeling. And I hope their voices stay through your process as this goes forward. This is a big deal, what you guys are doing. This is a plan that may be in place for 30 years, and that affects, an entire generation, a family, going forward. So I'm bashing, and I'm being a little bit tough, but at the same time, I appreciate you listening and hearing, and that we've had this opportunity, because that's more than some of the other cities have provided. So thank you, Hector and Beth and everybody, for all your hard work. It's not an easy path you're walking.
No, I thank you for your comments, and we don't take it personal. I think, just to let you know too, I'm a resident of the city of Pittsburgh, so I come at this from a perspective of, the decisions that are made are impacting me. It impacts my children. My children go here to a local school district, schools. So coming from that perspective, I could tell you I have a lot of, skin in the game. And I plan on being here until my kids go off to college at the very minimum. So I'll be around for quite a while. And I appreciate your frank comments. I hope that you feel that you can be frank with us, because nothing's taboo or nothing's off the shelf. We're not trying to, disencourage conversation. And I apologize if the chat feature was not enabled. It definitely was not with an ulterior motive or anything like that. I think that I actually like that the chat feature was disabled for one reason or another, because it allows for everybody to focus really on the presentation and the conversation that's going on. Sometimes it could be a little bit distracting to see a list of chats, building up on the side, and then you kind of lose track of what's going on in the actual conversation. So we're more than happy to put together a list of names and contacts, with either phone numbers or emails, so that you guys can coordinate and get together and, build coalitions and, do that kind of work. We are all about that. We want to hear what everybody thinks about, whether it's a landowner, stakeholder, a CBO, or another, interested party. We want to hear from all sides. So I hope that that's coming across. And I appreciate you saying that you're disappointed, but that you're hopeful. And we will continue to, strive forward and, listen to your comments and try to improve our surveys in the future. I think that all of us hear that loud and clear. So again, my apologies, and we will try to improve moving forward. So with that.
I do want to note,
Yeah.
That, well, I'm hearing myself on 2 locations. I do want to note that you should have everyone's emails from the email that I sent today with the agenda, the meeting agenda. We will get names and associate them with emails, but in case you're rearing to reach out to someone tonight, for instance, you've got everybody's email in the email that I sent you with the agenda.
And I would also like to chime in and just assure you that all of those concerns, we are anticipating addressing them. We need to have a land use map so we can take the next level and dive deeper into it. We have a traffic consultant who will be doing a VNT analysis. So we'll be doing a detailed VNT analysis of what the preferred alternative means, and then looking at ways to refine that and to improve it. And similarly with sea level rise and climate adaptation, we'll be looking at how the preferred alternative would be impacted by sea level rise, and what steps we can take and how we can either implement programs or make changes to address that. So your first step here, and you're kind of having faith in us as we say, we will do it, we will address it, is really important that we get some initial feedback so that we can then really analyze that map at a deeper level and have some refinements and some modifications that the community can discuss. And that discussion will be continued through the draft EIR, through the draft general plan process. So there will be additional details that are provided, and then another opportunity for community feedback.
Thanks, Beth. And then we're going to give Callie the last word here. I'm sorry, Callie, you're muted.
Sorry about that.
No, no worries.
I just want to piggyback on to Manisha and the other lady. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Linda. Hi. You know, the survey, we had spoken up for the last survey, and I know you guys tried to make improvements upon it. And I'll be sending an email to Sarah with some ideas and comments or graphics. It's very glossy. The actual graphics, you can't read them, you can't see them. So it's really hard to answer your questions or do a preference when you can't see the visuals clearly enough to know what the hell they're saying. So I don't know if it's too late to insert, you know, same graphics, just done a little bit better. You know, the fonts are so small, you can't read them. And I know that there's a lot of people that are just going to lose interest in it. They may click on it, but I clicked on it and I couldn't even get past page 7 before I was like, this is too much. The text within it, and again, I'll send Sarah an example of it, but the text within it is just verbal. It's too much as far as there's no, see, I'm right there with Manisha. I've been on my computer all day. You can't see city streets. So in the text, it's referring to city streets and where the location is. And yet you go to the map and you can't see where that is. So if you're not familiar with that part of the city, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't look like anything. So I don't think you're going to get accurate answers because not all the information is clear, if that makes sense.
Would it be easier? So Hector and I had talked about this, and he had mentioned potentially including links. Would it be helpful if we had links and you could click on it and go to a link that was the actual, like a more detailed version of that image that you could zoom in on? So we're using SurveyMonkey, and one of the shortcomings is you can't zoom in on images. And so they kind of have a fixed width, and we actually had some, you know, a hard time with that component of this. Is how do we, this is a lot of detailed information. We don't just want to say in the survey, go read the whole land use alternatives and capacity report. We want to provide some information in the survey to kind of help people understand what we're talking about at that point in time. But would it be useful if there were links you could click on that would take you to a map or take you to that figure where you can zoom in and out of it?
I think that would help a lot. The graphics too need to have another look over. There's a lot of errors in them. Again,
I'm sorry for interrupting, but so long as that link would then take you back to where you were, without getting lost.
Right. That was our Hector's and my discussion. Okay.
Yeah, if you had a link that would blow it up so that you could kind of look at it and see, and then you can go back to the questions, and go, oh, okay, you know, I want this area, I want that area.
Yeah, I think what we could do is
the
we
survey-
could make it so that it pops up in a different window on a different tab. And then if you still have the tab open from your survey, you could just swap out, you know, to the previous screen and return back to your survey essentially.
I think that would help a lot. The other thing is, I think the survey, I think a lot of us are too close to it, been looking at it too long. So I'm trying to come at it from a perspective of somebody just brand new, fresh looking at it. To me, it read like, you know, I understood it because I've been in these meetings from the get-go and build up to it. And so I understand it. But for somebody with fresh eyes coming in, it feels like you missed something. It feels like you weren't invited to something, and you know what I mean? You missed
You're late to the party.
Right, exactly. Great way to put it. Late to the party. And so, I mean, I don't want to dumb down anything, but I think it needs to be simplified for, you know, if us who have been in these meetings and following along with this are struggling with the survey, that should say something. That if somebody brand new coming into it, you know, we're going to send out blasts, email blasts, and Facebook and Instagram and all that other stuff. And these people that are just seeing it for the first time, which a lot of them will be, it's overwhelming. It feels like, you know, you missed the party. The graphics in the slideshow actually were much more interesting and said a lot more. The ones with the map, and on the left-hand side, there was a whole map key of what everything was in the map. That was nice and clear. Within the survey, they're teeny tiny. I think they're about 3-point font. You can't see it, and you see some of the colors, but it doesn't, you don't know what it relates to within the map. I'm a very visual person. I'll look at a visual before I'll read something. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to do that. Especially in today's age, we're all visuals, right? So that's, I guess, just my comments on it of, you know, how can you make the survey not so dry and seeming like you just missed a meeting and here's the footnotes of the meeting and it's very dry. How can we make it look more interactive and engaging? And again, Beth's slides are very interactive and engaging, very colorful, very, maybe I'm a designer, so I'm coming at it from that perspective as well. That's, I guess I'm done. That's my comments. It's late, so I'll just be quiet. And I'll send Sarah some examples of what I'm talking about and ways maybe we can clean it up if it's not too late to kind of fix it.
No, I was going to say thank you for your comments, because we do, especially now that we're going to start doing the bigger push for folks to hit the website and fill out the survey. Now still a good time to make adjustments. So Sarah, Beth, and I will get together, you know, take all this feedback and really look at, again, how can we simplify it more, maybe substitute some of the images in there with, you know, the infographics that are in the slideshow that Beth provided today. So again, thank you for those comments. We'll take it in full stride, and hopefully you'll see a different version out there with, you know, some improvements that really help try to drive at people's feedback. I know it's getting late. We do have 2 other folks that are raising their hand. I just want to do a quick time check if everybody's still, you know, open to, you know, continuing and soldiering on. Or is everybody still interested in? Okay, great. So with that, let's go with, I think Susan had her hand raised next.
Thank you, Hector. I'll be brief. I just wanted to say that I do share those comments with Manisha and Kali and Peter and others on this forum, that the questions seem to be directed, and then also they seem to be hard to answer. So what my concern is about that is that the answers will then be skewed, and as Manisha pointed out, all the nuances won't be there. And I recognize that we will have opportunities to comment at City Council and Planning Commission meetings, etc., and make comments within the survey. But just know that that it's very, I have to compliment you because we've come a long way. When Sarah first started telling us about the brownfield and how we need to prioritize the revitalization all the way up to Envision Pittsburg. So I, like Linda, you know, I'm doing a little bashing, but I also want to say, great job, guys. We've come a long way. And I know that we're in that home stretch where you're going to get to that general plan. You just need a bit more information from our fellow citizens. And we'll do our level best to get out there and push to get that survey completed. But it's going to be a challenge with some of how it's structured. So if you can make some slight changes, perhaps that will help. Thank you.
We will definitely move forward with that guidance, and also understand that normally we probably wouldn't be doing a survey, that we're really kind of, our hands are tied with, you know, the different outreach methods that are at our disposal. Normally we would be meeting person to person, looking at large scale maps, kind of having an open house and having a very informal discussion, not necessarily, hey, you know, pick this one, what are your preferences, but just go ahead and comment on what's on these different alternatives and writing down notes. Normally we don't, you know, do an online survey for something as complicated as this, but we really don't have very much of a choice with, you know, respecting people's, you know, desires to social distance, and also not, you know, coming from the city and encouraging, you know, larger gatherings. So I appreciate you guys being patient with us and working with, you know, with the constraints that we have, but we will try to do the best with what we have. So thank you, Susan. Peter, you're up next.
Yeah, just not to add to what everyone else has said, but to say that we're going through a situation now with schools where so many are on virtual education. And what we're finding out is that there are a good portion of the population that are not connected adequately to high-speed internet, even though they have it in their neighborhood. And they don't, if they are connected, they don't have the equipment needed to receive and to understand. And if they do, they're still not capable, in some cases, of really comprehending how best to use it. And so that just adds to your challenges, Hector. And I understand completely what you're saying. You're stuck with a situation where you have to get feedback and you can't do it in public meetings the way you have in the past. It would be so much better. But that means, I think, simplifying it as much as possible. So that's my comment.
Absolutely. No, I can agree with you more. So I think that wraps up folks with their hands raised. Well, I just want to, you know, thank everybody, especially those that stayed after class, so to speak, to, you know, add some additional, you know, constructive criticism for how we can improve our survey. Again, we will kind of meet offline and try to see how we can pivot, what's at our disposal for making improvements. But I really appreciated the breadth and wealth of comments that we received tonight. So with that, unless Beth or Sarah, you have anything to add, I think that we could adjourn.
Thank you all for all your time. And thank you, Beth and Hector, for covering.
Thank all of you.
You are welcome.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
It's been great.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great night.